Welcome to our webcast today. Thank you for joining us this morning. Our speakers are Joe Orangel and Kim Jones from Visual Risk IQ. They are one of Automation's integration partners. And with them is Mark Hayfitz from Emory University. Today, they will be showing us how to build a business case for data analytics. And part of that will draw on Mark's experience expanding data analytics at Emory. Today's webcast is worth 1 CPE. In order to earn that CPE, you'll need to answer the 3 polling questions that will pop up throughout the webcast and respond to the evaluation at the end of the webcast. If you have any questions, please type them in the question box on the right hand of the screen, and we will answer all of the questions at the end of the webcast. The webcast is being recorded. We will send CPE certificates, the recording, and any slides next week, hopefully at the early part of next week. And the slides are also on the handouts. I can now turn it over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As Lindsay shared, Kim and I have been working together for more than 10 years in helping audit and compliance professionals get up the learning curve with IDEA, as well as other analytics tools and the newer visual reporting tools like Tableau and Click and Power BI together with IDEA. Today is the first of a 5-part webinar series called Winning Ways with Data Analytics. Our future sessions are going to focus on brainstorming, on overcoming some data acquisition challenges, on audit reporting changes that might be needed associated with data analytics. And the final session will feature another Visual Risk IQ and IDEA client who will provide information on how they've changed their internal audit methodology to help with adoption of data analytics. But before we get to the how to build a winning data analytics program, we wanted to start out with Mark and Emory University with a discussion on how they built their business case at Emory. We trust that you'll see Mark's program at Emory is quite advanced and pays a number of dividends for the audit team and for the entire university. So let's start with Mark and a quick review on how your data analytics work fits together with the rest of the internal audit team at Emory. Mark, before talking about some of the accomplishments, could you just give us a bit of an overview of Emory University, its internal audit team, and how data analytics fits in?
Thanks, Joe. I'm really excited to be here and talk about data analytics today. As far as the organizational structure at Emory, we have 3 main goals: academic, research, and patient care. And under academic, we have 4 undergraduate schools and 7 graduate schools, and the total student population is about 15,000 students. From the research perspective, we have about $600 million in research funding. And in patient care, we have about $3 billion net revenue, $2.3 billion in assets, 6 hospitals, 1,800 beds, 300 physician offices, and 2,000 doctors. And we have about 30,000 employees combined between healthcare and university, an annual operating budget of about $5 billion, and an endowment of about $7 billion. So you can see there's a lot of area of risk that we need to cover. And from the slide, you can see how we're structured in internal audit. Basically, we have a healthcare team and a university team. And the healthcare team right now, we have actually just three staff members. We just dropped one who left us recently. So really right now we're down a person in healthcare. And on the university side, we have basically 5 staff members who cover the university side. And then there's me, who's the director of data analytics for internal audit, and I cover both sides, both healthcare and university.
And for an organization as big and as broad and as complex and as much many employees and as much operational risk that you probably expect to have in an organization that size, I think it's really impressive to us, Mark, that the audit team covers as much as it does with as few boxes as you have on the slide here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your specific roles and responsibilities in the data analytics role and how you support your audit colleagues, both healthcare and in university?
Sure. Basically, the way that I'm able to support both groups is through a framework that we've developed where we have defined roles and responsibilities. And, for my responsibility, it's basically developing and maintaining these risk-based analytic scripts. And so what I do is I meet with each team on a quarterly basis, and we basically review the annual audit plan and figure out where we can use data analytics, where it'll best fit in the plan. And so this helps to establish better linkage between myself and the two audit teams. And it's really a collaborative process.
Super, thank you. We were looking for a cartoon to kind of lighten things up after the introductions, and couldn't find a lot of writing from Gilbert about internal audit, or particularly internal audit analytics. But we did see this one. Was there something about this picture, Mark, that made you think, yeah, that's kind of us sometimes?
Well, yeah, as you can see, it's all about trying to build a swing, right? And I think I've been on both sides of this swing, where I was either the client or I was actually the project leader. And in order to be successful, you really have to understand what the requirements are, for your project, and what are those deliverables going to be. So in order to get there, you have to really gain trust and understanding, from both sides. So that way you can basically begin to build a proof of concept so that everybody can agree to it. So that way you're not going to wind up at the end of the day with, the wrong picture here. So I can see that there's plenty of opportunity where things can go wrong, but there's also plenty of opportunity for success.
Indeed. Well, thank you. It's a good way to lighten things up. The next slide is kind of the impetus, if you will, for this this webinar today, right? I mean, as I mentioned at the introduction, Kim and I have been in this space for more than 10 years. You've been leading Emory's analytics program for 7 years inside of internal audit, and of course we worked together before you joined internal audit and when you were in the IT organization at Emory, helping provide data for some of our initial projects. And when Kim and I and when the folks at Automation see the current Grant Thornton survey, and here they're asking the audit profession, to what extent are data analytics used to mitigate risks at your organization, you'll see that on the left side of the chart, never or rarely or even sometimes, more than half of the internal audit organizations surveyed are only either sometimes or rarely or maybe never even using data analytics. Yet you're over on the right side of the equation, using analytics often or even always in some of the testing at Emory. Do you have any thoughts on why our audit profession is where it is, and maybe how to move toward more frequent or more high value use of analytics in audit testing?
Yeah, I think the chart is pretty accurate, and from my perspective, the best way to move from the left side of the scale to the right side requires a paradigm shift, where you have to force yourself to get out of the traditional audit mode, which is really reactive and costly, and begin to use data analytics, which is more proactive and cost effective. So many audit teams are stuck on the left side because they don't know how to get started. So really you need to seek help from consultants like you, basically, Joe. You can the space, basically how to get things started. And I think a lot of teams just don't really know where to begin. And so obviously there's a continuum from those who don't know where to begin to those who have figured out a few things and are moving along the scale toward that right side. But it really does take knowledge externally sometimes to understand, where your weakness is and what is it that you need to do to improve in those areas so you can become successful in data analytics. So having worked at Emory for 25 years now, what helps me become successful at it is I pretty much know where all the data is and I know how to get to it. So it's all about that data acquisition, and also having some experience on the technical side and the functional side has enabled me to basically become a center of excellence for for Emory in the internal audit area. We've tried to train our staff in using different tools like IDEA or ACL, and to be honest, if you're not using it every day, it's hard to keep up with it. So if you have a dedicated resource, it definitely makes things easier, and it works best in our system.
Good. Well, you mentioned kind of the role of data analytics and again, building the business case. When we think about business case, sometimes we do things because we have to. Other times we do things because we want to. Could you tell us a little bit about Emory's decision to adopt data analytics? Was it because of something prescribed in the internal audit standards, or was it something that you all wanted to do?
Well, it's really something that we wanted to do. The goals of our data analytics program are aligned with helping internal audit accomplish its objectives. We use data analytics as a catalyst for positive institutional change in governance, risk mediation, and the design of business process internal controls. Data analytics helps us improve our capabilities to anticipate and respond to emerging risks and challenges. And really, it helps us be more agile. So as you can see from the slide, that basically, our charter gives us, full and unrestricted access to all data. But sometimes having access to the data, you can't always use it. And so you have to determine what's the best data to use. And so in our situation, we do like to understand how to use the data to best improve our chances for success and to become more efficient and effective. And some of our program goals in using data analytics, when it's embedded in our key services, helps in our risk assessment area, and it provides integrated support for our audits, and also for fraud analytics investigations. Helps us to detect potential improper transactions by mining them for patterns and discrepancies and anomalies.
Good. Thanks, Mark. Well, we did want to highlight that you have what we would characterize as a center of excellence or a center of expertise on data analytics, where you're a full-time dedicated resource, and then others on the team, while they use analytics they really come to you for adoption. Other organizations, will sometimes say that it's everybody's responsibility to use analytics tools like IDEA. Do you have a point of view on what works, what doesn't, maybe how that fits from a culture perspective? And with that, I think we're going to introduce our body of knowledge, which are the skills and knowledge and expertise that we think the team needs to have with data analytics.
Yeah, in our situation, having the Center of Excellence concept works well. I think, again, for most auditors, they don't really have the time to learn the tools to be really effective. So our goal is to train them on how to understand the results. And so I'm able to basically create the scripts and then generate the results, so then they can access those results and interpret, what they are. And so from the body of knowledge, that methodology is pretty accurate in terms of identifying areas of strengths and weaknesses. To be successful, you need to have certain skills, and so you have to decide, well, what is it you can bring to the table? Which one of these skills do you have, or do you need to acquire to be successful? In my situation, I brought a lot of experience with me from this list that you've got here in terms of the project management and data acquisition and manipulation. I understand data structures and how to write SQL and understand how to use the tools. But when I first joined Internal Audit, I didn't really have an internal audit background. So one of the things that I realized I needed to do was to improve that area and basically become a certified internal auditor. So I spent that time reviewing the documents and understanding what's required, and then taking the exam, and then thank goodness passing the exam, and then gaining a much better understanding as to what really happens in internal audit. So that enabled me to basically use my technical and functional skills and apply them in the internal audit realm. So when I meet with both teams, that I have a better understanding as to what they do and how can I deliver the results that they're expecting.
Good. Well, that'll be a nice segue to our first polling question here. Again, during introductions, we shared Mark was actually the IT resource on the consulting project that our firm was doing for Emory, where he provided data out of PeopleSoft, out of their travel system, and a host of other applications at Emory, so that we could work with now Chief Audit Executive Scott Stevenson on answering some of those business questions with data. And not too long after that, we developed this body of knowledge. Our firm believes that these are the skills that the audit team needs to have, and that again turns us to our polling question here. As you, the attendees in the webcast today, think about yourself, your own skills, and the skills of your team, we're asking you to think, what are the skills that you're strongest in, and is there any skill that in particular you may need to develop? And let me ask Kim if you've got any thoughts on the notion of having a center of excellence model where it's primarily one person's job to lead analytics versus some of the successful organization that we've seen that has taken more of an everybody's job. Kim, anything
I think
to
it's
add?
really difficult to make it everybody's job. I mean, perhaps in a small group it could work, but it's certainly having a core group seems to always work. And obviously at Emory, it's working with a core group of one. The issue obviously being when Mark's on vacation or unavailable for any reason, that compromises the ability to acquire data or do some of the analytics functions that Mark is uniquely qualified to do. But I think that we've seen a little success in the everybody learns it approach. I think the key is not necessarily that everybody can be as skilled as Mark is in analytics, but rather that everybody is aware of how data and data analytics can be used in each phase of an internal audit project. I think just that basic knowledge of where and how it can be used really helps to facilitate the use of analytics throughout the internal audit organization and throughout projects. And I think that's much more important than everybody needing to be a skilled data analytics practitioner.
It's a nice segue to asking about where analytics is used at Emory. So Kim, thank you. And Mark, if you could talk a little bit about how analytics is used in each step of the audit process.
Right. So basically, we want to be able to integrate data analytics in all audit processes when it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't lend itself well to certain parts of the process. But the idea is that we want to be able to implement a sustainable system. So from my perspective, I like to meet with our teams, like I say, on a quarterly basis, and talk about where can we use data analytics. Again, where does it make sense in each of these steps, whether it's planning or scoping or field work. Typically, for the planning, we look at a lot of historical data to determine, what is the landscape, what is really the area that we need to be focusing on, and then that allows us to move into the scoping area where we can determine how can we really put borders around this so that we don't start letting the scope creep. And as far as the field work goes, a lot of times it's a matter of identifying, well, where's all the data coming from? We do have a lot of disparate systems and systems that are not networked, and so we have to understand, well, where does that come from, and can we actually use it? Can we integrate it in some way to come up with a process that links all the data together and then can produce results that are meaningful and add value, especially when it comes to being able to take that information and apply that to the actual audit report. So obviously there's a lot of back and forth between myself and the audit teams, and then there's back and forth between them and management. And the idea is, again, to try and figure out how best to use my services to enable them to be successful in their process. So this next slide focuses on how we use data analytics at Emory, and in terms of seeing the value of what analytics can provide is really what's most important. So the idea being that how can we show the return on the investment? How will data analytics make a difference for us? And luckily, from my experience, having been in internal audit now for about 6 years, we have a lot of support from our leadership, and they understand that data analytics is has proven to add value, and someone has to have that vision. And again, our chief audit officer, Scott Stevenson, is the one who really had that vision and saw that there are ways to do things much more efficiently, and data analytics helps us to do that. It supports the agile internal audit methodology for delivering impactful and relevant, timely and readable and visual reports. And it helps the auditors respond rapidly to changing priorities and emerging issues.
And when we were rehearsing, Mark, for the webinar, you mentioned that IDEA is one of several tools that you have in your tool belt at Emory. You use a host of them, which are listed on the screen here. But can you talk a little bit about the strengths that you find with IDEA and why it may be a good tool to start out with for beginners in building their analytics program?
Yeah, so I do use a mix of tools. IDEA, being one of them. Also use Alteryx and Oracle SQL Developer, and then Microsoft SQL Server Managed Studio and Integration Services, and then of course Tableau. And for IDEA, I just use the desktop version, so we don't have a server version. And what I found was when I first started working in internal audit, they actually had ACL, and the license was about to expire, and I was told I could choose whichever tool I'd want to use. So I thought, okay, well, let me check out ACL, let me check out IDEA. And I, did an analysis and realized that, wow, IDEA is just so much easier to use than ACL. Again, because I hadn't used either one of them, but for me, it just seemed to be a no-brainer, just so much easier to use. It can connect to many different data sources. Again, ACL can probably do the same thing, but again, having used IDEA just is very easy to connect to whatever I want to connect to. The other distinguishing feature is that you can import PDF files and then make IDEA databases out of those. And I know, Joe, I've worked with you on that, where we had a project where we were on the healthcare side. We were looking at insurance claim denials, and we had to take PDFs and convert them into IDEA databases. And it was a struggle, first of all, to get the data, and then once we got it, we found it again. It was going to come in a PDF format, and then you were able to basically help us come up with a template that we could easily use to begin to create those IDEA databases. And I also know that whenever I run into any kind of a problem, IDEA's got great support. They have that 20-minute rule, and for me, I don't have the 20 minutes, so if it's more like 10, I'll go ahead and call. And I will say, when I first started using IDEA, I was very anxious to get answers, and I would call, and and sure enough, there'd be somebody there who could provide me with an answer right away. Some of the other vendors that I've dealt with, a lot of times, basically, you can't even talk to a person. You have to email in your question and then wait 2 or 3 days for a response. And with IDEA, again, the support has been really just amazing for me. Another nice feature I like about IDEA is it has a very easy scripting language, so you can develop scripts quite rapidly. And also, even with the desktop version, you can schedule jobs to run. And it also includes certain audit functions which other tools don't have, just like, for example, Benford's Law. And it also comes with a visualization feature. So what I like about using IDEA is that I can quickly create a script, schedule something to run, and basically I can develop what I call a proof of concept. So whenever we're looking at trying to develop maybe a new analytic, the first place I go to typically will be IDEA, because I know how quickly I can get something up and running. And so it just helps, to build that, that structure very quickly. So I find it to be, again, a very easy tool to use, and I've been very successful with it.
Great. In terms of maybe what application or what business process to get started, Lindsay, do you want to take us to our polling question and describe the polling a bit more?
Sure. Our next polling question is, which areas have you used data analytics most recently? If you aren't using data analytics, where would you like to implement? Accounts payable, vendor conflict of interest, HR and payroll, procurement cards, or something else? Again, you have to answer all 3 of the polling questions in order to receive your CPE credits. So I'll go ahead and let y'all respond and review the results, as I know that a couple people had questions about those last time.
Okay.
We're actually getting a lot of something else. So that's good to hear.
Good. And Mark, we'll have you on deck in a minute here to tell us about how the different analytics tools fit together at Emory and how you've moved from one-time proof of concepts to more repeatable or continuous auditing and continuous controls monitoring, because those are some things that that are really advanced at Emory compared to other organizations that we work with.
That's true. What I find is the more data that we consume, the more you see that the data is not always that clean or in terms of quality, the greatest of quality. And so what I found is a really good tool to use for data cleansing and data blending is Alteryx. Again, it's easy to use. It's a lot different from the way you would use IDEA. With Alteryx, you actually have like a canvas that you drag and drop things onto. And it allows for that cleansing the data where sometimes you'll get fields that contain, let's say you're looking for an employee ID and you're expecting there to be 7 digits, maybe you're only getting 5, or maybe you're actually seeing letters showing up. And so you can easily identify those problems and begin to extract those areas where there are problems and that need to be reviewed and then sent back to the source, and then have them basically fix it and then send you a new file to see if they've been able to clean it up. So, it provides that ability to give you insight into that quality of the data. As far as visualizations go, I find that a lot of times I'll take data that comes from an extract that I'll create from, it could be IDEA or it could be from Alteryx, and I'll put it in Tableau. Tableau has got a lot of nice features in terms of its graphing and mapping areas where you can take latitude and longitude coordinates and create a map of your data from that. And I found that to be very useful. We had a project where I was doing, I was working with our police department on crime analytics, and they were able to provide me with a file that contained different types of crimes that occurred against, let's say, Emory property or Emory assets. And they provided the addresses, and so I was able to take that data and put it in Tableau and create a map that showed where the crimes were occurring, with what frequency. Not that we have a big crime problem here in Emory, but occasionally there are certain times where a crime could occur where something is stolen. So we track that and create this map, and it helps the police see where these crimes are occurring, what time of day they're occurring, what days of the week they're occurring, what types of assets are being either damaged or stolen, and it helps them basically redeploy their resources to hopefully become more predictive and I like to say prescriptive, but we're providing a prescription for them to say, hey, we have a problem here. We can fix it very easily by, let's say, deploying officers to a certain location on a certain day, and just by them being there could prevent crimes from occurring. So that was a very useful project, and we meet quarterly with our police department and go through those different types of crimes that occur, and then look at those visualizations and try and determine, how can we improve on that.
Wow, that's an innovative use of analytics for sure. I guess before we talk about the polling results, I know Lindsay's going to jump in a moment, but can you just give us a list, maybe, Mark, of some business processes that Emory runs analytics and continuous monitoring on, and we'll compare your experiences to the poll results.
Yeah, well, we do a lot in the procurement or procure-to-pay space, where we look at invoices, duplicate invoices. We look at our travel program, looking for areas where there have been entries, again, sort of duplicate entries on travel, where the same expense is being entered multiple times. From the HR side, we look at employees who may have been terminated for cause and then have reapplied to get rehired. And so what we can do there is we can identify, those former employees that maybe we don't want to reemploy again because, again, they had been terminated for cause. We also look at P-card data. That's really one of the easy ones to look at. I think you'll see you can gain a good understanding in terms of, are there any kind of policy violations with that? Is there spend occurring on weekends or on holidays? Are there transactions that are being split? These are the things that we can look at, and we can actually even create a weighted system for that, and then identify which transactions are the riskiest, and which employees who have P cards could be, again, at risk for a policy violation. So those are really the main areas that we cover, and we found that we've gotten a lot of good results there, and have been able to really create an awareness that we are monitoring for this, and we have seen a decline in a lot of the abuse. So it shows us that we're being effective, and we do have metrics on these things where we look at, let's say, the number of exceptions that occur, and we can see the trending of it. So we look at that on a monthly basis, and we know that there's certain times of the year where we'll see an uptick. Usually could be in December, around the holidays, where there could be more abuse that occurs, and so we'll try and get the word out, in December, in early December, that this, we're monitoring for this, and so we try and have controls in place that will mitigate those risks.
Gotcha. Well, Lindsay, how does that compare? Can you share the results?
Right. Actually, 44% of the respondents use data analytics in a different area than the ones that were in the poll. 24% use it for accounts payable data, 15% for procurement cards, 10% for HR and payroll, with our final 8% using it for vendor conflict of interest areas.
Interesting. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I think what we wanted to do, right? You're doing continuous auditing and monitoring, and some scripts are running as often as monthly or more frequently. You mentioned the notion of a proof of concept, and it's not necessarily to encourage folks to start out in the fast lane, but rather that it's been a gradual process over the years. Can you talk a little bit about how you go from doing something once to doing something on a more frequent basis, and maybe some of the waypoints along the way?
Sure. I mean, basically, you just can't take that one giant leap, but you really have to take a lot of small steps. And again, before I started working in internal audit, I know that Scott had been trying to find ways of implementing audit techniques that did use data analytics, and I know he began working, with your firm prior to my arrival, and so you were able to basically do a lot of analysis for him, again, looking kind of at historical data, and that's how I guess I got involved, really, because I was tapped as the person that could provide that data to you. And so
Sure.
That's how you and I guess, established our relationship. And I think what we saw is that, we're going to start out by looking at, historically, in terms of, what's been going on. Are there areas where we are seeing risk, or are there areas where there's controls that are not working correctly, or maybe controls that are not even in place to prevent this type of risk? So as you move along the continuum, you begin to gain a better understanding of, what are the problem areas, and how can we better address them. And so you want to move from doing sort of these one-time data dumps to begin to create a database of, or actually creating a copy of your source systems from your ERP side. So, if you have financial or HR type data that you want to be able to look at, you don't want to be accessing that production data. You want to be able to take a copy of it and work with that copy of the data. And so usually you can get that data so that it's still fairly relevant, that it's only maybe a day behind your production system. And then you begin to develop a way to extract and transform and load that data into into a system where you can then apply different queries against that data to begin to look for exceptions. And so that's really what we did, is we decided to move from sort of doing these one-off ad hoc type of reporting to a more continuous process where we would, again, extract that data on a daily basis and then be able to run queries against that data to look for certain types of exceptions, and then put those exceptions into a database where they can be easily accessible by our internal audit staff, and then take it to the next level where we want to then alert management to these exceptions and give them the ability to have a web interface to look at those exceptions, and then report on the status of the exceptions, and basically be responsible for managing those exceptions. And then the next step for us was to say, okay, now that management has that ability to manage the exceptions, we want to have the ability to monitor that. And that's where the continuous controls monitoring concept comes into play. So we're moving now from continuous auditing to continuous monitoring, where we're monitoring management to make sure that they're actually keeping up with all the exceptions that are being sent to them.
Got it. Well, let's talk about some of those exception transactions that you're monitoring, and maybe some advice that you'd have for beginners that would be starting out with their data analytics program.
Yeah, I think again, the idea is what data is most accessible to you, and for us, we found that we're basically a PeopleSoft shop for both financial, HR, and student administration, and so all that data lives in Oracle tables. And so the first thing we wanted to do was to find interested parties that see the value in data analytics and understand that we can help them do their jobs more efficiently and effectively. And so we actually had our finance group come to us and say, yeah, we'd like to be a part of what you're trying to build here. So we quickly had stakeholders who saw the value in what we were doing. And so we sat with them and had several brainstorming meetings and came up with the idea of, well, let's start looking at things like payment integrity. Let's look at, again, the duplicate invoice payments, and let's look at per diems for domestic trips. Let's look for duplicate travel expenses, things like that. And so we would sit with them and figure out what would work best for them in terms of the types of exceptions that they want to see, and then what is the best way to deliver those results to them. And so after, again, several back and forth meetings with them and showing them what the exceptions would look like, how they could use them to help them do their job more effectively, that's really what we strive to do. And the key thing here is to make sure that you're not creating additional work for them, because as soon as they think that that's what's happening, they're immediately going to drop out, and then your program is going to fail. So for us, that was so important to make sure that we could deliver something, again, that increased value for them, that would reduce their workload and actually improve our visibility, into their work process. And so that way, if we ever were going to be doing an audit or review in their area, we now both have that ability to see all those exceptions and see where the risks are. So now it's very transparent to everybody. We can see, what are the areas that are generating problems, and what is it that management can do to address those issues. And so we went ahead and actually we hired a different consulting firm to help us build our process, and created our continuous controls monitoring system based on a SQL Server platform. And it really only took us about 6 weeks to implement. And within really the first month, we recovered the costs of the implementation based upon finding duplicate payments that even some AP recovery firms were not able to find. And so a lot of it, again, is just understanding your data, working with the functional groups so that they can give you information that maybe it's not easily understandable, and that they can explain it to you, and so you understand their process better. Once we began to build confidence with them and earn their trust, we began to add more of these, what I call integrity checks, for them to be able to receive these exception reports. And suddenly we begin to see how this increases your value.
Well, good, Mark. Good examples, and certainly strong business case examples on slide 19 there. Just one last question before we invite it up for questions in the group. That is, we asked you to think about what advice you would have for a beginner, as well as what advice you would have maybe for more advanced users of analytics. So if you can talk a little bit about more of the advanced folks, and then we'll invite some questions from the broader group. Lindsay, if you could moderate the questions from Mark and Kim and I, that would be super. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, from the beginner standpoint, again, it does come down to, finding stakeholders that will be supportive of your process, convince them that this is a good thing for them. And the way to get there is you just have to, go out and meet with them, do brainstorm with them. And then once you can identify a group, then you want to begin to build a proof of concept to show them what you can do. And again, I find that using IDEA is an easy way to get started. So again, for the beginners, it's just really the perfect tool to begin to create your proof of concept and be able to deliver something very quickly so that your stakeholders can see the value in that. And as far as the advanced users, to become advanced, obviously you want to get to a place where you have a continuous auditing program in place, and you want to be able to take that next step, which is again to become continuous monitoring, and because you want to make sure that management is taking that appropriate action, and you want to make sure your program is sustainable, scalable, and can you leverage that platform for other projects. I can give you an example. In our situation, we were able to leverage our SQL Server platform so that not only are we doing continuous monitoring, but now we're also implementing an issue tracking system so that our auditors can communicate easier with management in terms of issues that have come up. So now we have both a sustainable product and one that is very flexible, very scalable, and so far has been very successful for us.
Okay. We've got one last polling question, and then there's a question that's come in from the group that I think we want to go back and cover. Mark, slide 17. Let's ask the group what the takeaways that they have from today as our polling question, and then we'll come back to a question from a smaller audit shop. The question was asked, what
Let
should organization...
let me read the question. I know some people don't always see the poll pop up. Our last polling question is, what's your biggest takeaway from today's webinar? The first option is our team needs to varied strengths across the body of knowledge to be successful at data analytics. The second option is that they now have an idea of how to start a new data analytics project with brainstorming important business questions to answer. The third option is the importance of cross-referencing our objectives and questions to available digital data. Our next option is I can use data and analytics in virtually every phase of my internal audit projects. And I can use different tools like Tableau, IDEA, Power BI to work together to meet the data analytics challenges and data acquisition, preparation, and visualization issues. We'll give you all a few seconds to respond, and I will review the top few responses that we got back, and then we can go and do the quick Q&A at the end.
Okay. And Mark, heads up, there was a question from a small team, a small audit team, if there's not the opportunity for a dedicated resource, what advice you'd have for someone. And I think your slide here about which business process to get started with will be helpful.
All right. I've gotten the responses back. 34% had their biggest takeaway was the use of data and analytics in every phase of the audit project, which I think is kind of the biggest takeaway. And the next two were 24% about using brainstorming to start a new data analytics project, followed by having strengths across the body of knowledge to build the best data analytics team.
Super. Well, Mark, the question for small shops, right? What's the right data analytics business process to get started with? You said you've got the multi-step process that you go through when someone asks you, is this a good project? Can you cover that? And then we'll also describe the remaining webinar series as well as other questions that may come in.
Sure. Yeah, I think, well, just talking about if you don't have a dedicated resource, you probably are going to need help. You're going to need some consulting help to help you get started. I mean, that's the first thing is, how do you get started? If you don't really have enough knowledge or skill, then you definitely are going to need help from someone. And so that's what I would definitely recommend. A lot of times you're constrained by your budget as well as to what can you afford. And so that comes into play. I think, in terms of the steps as far as where do you begin and where do you go from there? You have to make sure you have someone who has knowledge of data, that functional knowledge, and also some technical knowledge, and who can actually communicate how best to understand where to go from picking up the data to generating results. It's, in our situation, we like to use this decision tree where we say, is the data available? In a lot of cases, if it's in a proprietary system, it's just not going to be available. And but for most ERP systems, it is fairly available because you have databases that you can easily connect to. So that's where you want to start out, is how available is your data? The next thing is, again, do you understand that data? Is there somebody in your group who can understand it? If you don't understand it, then you're going to struggle and not really be able to produce any valuable results. And then, again, data quality, that's something that I've referenced earlier, where a lot of times you get data that could be missing information or may not be complete. So it may require some additional cleansing or blending, or maybe you may need to go back to the source and request them to correct it and then resend it. And then you want to look at, does the data lend itself to be able to identify risk? Because that's what it's all about. You're trying to identify risk, and if it's not going to do it for you, then there's no real value to it. Sometimes we wind up with situations where we have to pull data from multiple sources, which can create complexity because sometimes you have to find a key where you can join the data together. And what you'll find is that the more data sources you have to pull from, the more complex it can become. And then you may wind up basically spinning your wheels and not getting very good results either. And then the last thing you want to look at is how repeatable is the process. So you want to strive for something that you can repeat on a continuous basis.
Thank you. We have a few.
Next.
All right. Hey, Joe, you're back.
Sorry, Lindsay. Sorry, Lindsay. I was saying we put up the webinar series. Next Friday, we're going to be talking about brainstorming how to connect business questions to digital data. There were a couple of questions that came in about healthcare compliance and some questions there about what questions to answer, Mark, with data. The third session in the webinar is about overcoming some of the data acquisition challenges. Winning ways number 4 is to be talking about changing your audit reports. And then finally, the last in the series, as I mentioned, is going to be about sustaining the use of data analytics with changes to your audit methodology. That last question reminds me of a question that came in from our group regarding a continuous data pull, where they're pulling data in perhaps from accounts payable, but yet by the time the analysis is done, payment errors have already been made. Mark, do you have any advice on how to break that paradigm of paying and chasing versus preventing payment errors from being made?
Yeah, again, in our situation, our process runs on a daily basis. So when all the accounts payable data has been processed, prior to the check being cut or to the ACH payment being made, that's when we run our analysis to make sure that we're not double paying. So we are actually capturing the analytic is running before a payment is made. So we are preventing that payment from leaving the building. And that's really what you want to strive for. It's all about the timing. You want to make sure your analytic is running at a time before payment is processed. And so you should be able to make that comparison with your data in terms of, is that transaction, has it already been paid? And so that way the analytics should run prior to payment.
All right, thank you so much. If you are interested in registering for the other webinars in the series, you can register at www.automation.com, and you can find them on the Training and Events tab. We also, these are paid webcasts. They're $25 each, but if you register for all 4, you can attend for $75. We hope that you learned a lot and kind of are inspired to get more out of data analytics and get it in your department. And if you have any questions, you can send us an email and we will try and get those answers out to you as soon as we can. The CPE certificates will be sent next week along with the recording and slides. Thank you so much, Joe and Mark, for joining us.
Mark and Kim and Lindsay, thank you. And again, there were a couple of questions that came in via the chat windows that we didn't have time to cover. Know that Kim and Mark and I will look at those. And if you've provided a proper email for us in your sign up, we'll get back with you with a private answer to those questions. So thank you, everyone, Mark and Kim in particular, and hope to see many of you all next Friday as we cover brainstorming together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.